Tonight, breaking news. Benjamin Netanyahu warns Hamas if hostages aren't released on Saturday, the ceasefire in Gaza will end. The Israeli Prime Minister's warning his troops would resume intense fighting. In the last hour, Donald Trump's also warned if hostages aren't released, all bets are off. We'll be live at the White House. Also tonight, Kim Leadbeater's accused of managing a chaotic process after she drops her proposal for a High Court judge to personally sign off every assisted dying case. We'll hear from the Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, on why she thinks the government's plans for more apprenticeships won't mean a drop-off in standards. And we'll find out what a £100 million bat tunnel tells us about the Prime Minister's plan for growth. In 50 years since she became Conservative leader, we'll look at Margaret Thatcher before she became the Iron Lady. All that and more with our very own Iron duo, Christine Jardine and Guto Harry, who'll be with us for the next hour. It's Tuesday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Well, we start with breaking news this hour because the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been warning Hamas that if hostages aren't released by noon on Saturday, the ceasefire will end and intense fighting will resume. Let's just take a listen to what he had to say.
The decision I passed unanimously in the Cabinet is this. If Hamas does not return our hostages by Saturday noon, the ceasefire will end and the IDF will return to intense fighting until Hamas is finally defeated.
Well, President Trump has also been speaking about this issue in Washington in the last hour.
I don't want to do 2 and then we do another 2 in another week and then we do 4 in 3 weeks. No. They either have them out by Saturday at 12 o'clock or all bets are off.
He was speaking after meeting Jordan's King Abdullah, also talking about his wider plan to take over Gaza.
It's Gaza. It's a war-torn area. We're going to take it. We're going to hold it. We're going to cherish it. We're going to get it going eventually where a lot of jobs are going to be created for the people in the Middle East. It's going to be for the people in the Middle East, but I think it can be a diamond. It can be an absolute tremendous asset for the Middle East.
And Mr. President, take it under what authority? It is sovereign territory.
Under the U.S. authority.
And Mr. President, would you seek to personally develop property in Gaza after this happens?
No.
Well, our US correspondent Mark Stone is at the White House. Mark, what can you tell us?
Where to begin, Sophie? Let's begin at the end, what you just heard there from Donald Trump. This issue which he's been pushed on so many times now, on what authority he can take control of Gaza, something he says he intends to do. He said yesterday he would buy it. Today he said he doesn't need to buy it because there's nothing for sale, which is true. But he does not explain on what legal authority America can just take control, occupy the area of land that is Gaza. But he said simply under US authority. And he said it with a key Arab leader sitting right next to him, King Abdullah of Jordan. But then listen to what King Abdullah said at the beginning of that moment in the White House, which was not supposed to be on camera, but at the last minute, the Trump administration allowed cameras in. King Abdullah said, "I truly believe with all the challenges that we have in the Middle East, I finally see somebody who can take us across the finish line to bring stability, peace and prosperity to all of us in the region." Now, that is a remarkable and incredibly telling statement by an Arab leader of Donald Trump. Now, clearly, he said it. The context in which he said it explains perhaps some of the subtext. He needs Donald Trump. Everyone needs Donald Trump on their side at the moment because everyone needs something from Donald Trump, who seems to be calling every single shot here at the moment, and he would have it no other way on the ceasefire, fragile, perilously fragile as it is. The Israelis feel emboldened from the meeting that Netanyahu had here last week. They feel like they've effectively got carte blanche to do whatever they want, and that, I think, was pushed even harder yesterday by the fact that Trump imposed this deadline of noon on Saturday of all the hostages, not just those that are due to be released in the phased process of the ceasefire, but all the hostages are not released by Saturday at noon. Then all hell would break loose, he said yesterday. Today, he said all bets would be off. So Trump is trying to short-circuit the ceasefire deal and just get Hamas to do everything that he said. He talks about them being bullies. Who are the bullies, he said in the Oval Office? The weak people are the bullies. Hamas are the bullies. So on one hand, you have Netanyahu feeling emboldened to do whatever he wants. And yet, on the other hand, you have a key Arab leader, the king no less of Jordan, saying that he believes, on the face of it at least, he believes that Donald Trump is the man who can bring peace, stability and prosperity to all of us in the region. Now, how on earth you square that? It is our job to try and analyse and square these things, but it is an extraordinary moment that we are in, where everyone appears to be trying to lock in behind Donald Trump because they are not quite sure what he will do, what he thinks, whose side he's on. All he says is, I want peace.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. Well, we've got another breaking story this evening because we're also hearing the US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff has been on a visit to Russia and secured the release on Tuesday of Mark Fogel, an American schoolteacher detained in Russia since August 2021. Well, our Moscow correspondent Ivor Bennett is joining us now. Ivor, just talk to me about what's happened.
Yeah, so this is a very big surprise, actually, that this has happened. One, that Steve Witkoff was in Moscow today. There were rumours swirling that he was here since this morning when reports surfaced on social media that a plane that he owned had touched down in a Moscow airport, but the Kremlin would neither confirm nor deny those reports. And even if people thought that those rumours were true, I don't think anyone thought that Steve Witkoff would be leaving Russia with an American citizen, having secured his release from prison. But that is exactly what has happened, according to the White House. Steve Witkoff is at the moment on his way back to the US with Mark Fogel, who is a 63-year-old American schoolteacher who has been languishing in a Russian prison since 2021. He was serving a 14-year sentence for drug smuggling, having been detained at a Moscow airport with 17 grams of marijuana on him. He claims it was for medical purposes, prescribed to him by doctors in the US for drugs to treat chronic pain. But he was convicted in a Russian court and sentenced to this 14-year term. And he, of course, missed out on the big prisoner swap that happened between Russia and the West in August, 6 months ago. His family at the time were furious and extremely upset. They issued a statement saying that they were heartbroken out and outraged that he wasn't included. They called it a glaring injustice. But now, 6 months on, it seems he's on his way home. And the big question, of course, is why now? How did it happen? And I think the answer, it seems, is all to do with Ukraine and negotiations over how to end Russia's war in Ukraine. Donald Trump has, of course, made it his mission to bring that conflict to a close. He promised to do it swiftly. And speculation has been mounting since his inauguration a few weeks ago that talks were nearing between him and Vladimir Putin, potential peace negotiations too. Nothing concrete on either side, only these rumours and these signals, with the two sides apparently circling each other. But now we do have something concrete, and it seems like it's the first piece of this puzzle in these wider negotiations over the Ukraine war. And the statement we have from the White House National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, tonight really plays into that. He says, President Trump, Steve Witkoff and the president's advisors negotiated an exchange that serves as a show of good faith from the Russians and a sign we are moving in the right direction to end the brutal and terrible war in Ukraine. So the cogs are now in motion, it seems, and Mark Fogel, an American citizen who's been in prison here since 2021, is on his way home.
Ivor, thank you very much indeed. To return to the politics now, because the assisted dying legislation is really the focus in Westminster today, and I wanted to do something slightly unusual this evening. I'm going to play you an interview that I filmed last night that now seems completely out of date. which is basically breaking all of the rules of television and journalism. But there is a reason for it, bear with me, because this interview, I feel, gets to the heart of the problem with the assisted dying legislation. Now, I don't need to tell you that the debate around whether someone who's terminally ill should be about to choose to die is hugely difficult. Passions, emotions run very high on both sides of the debate. But MPs decided to back the right to die at second reading, partly because of this argument.
Under this bill, any terminally ill person who wants to be considered for an assisted death would have to undertake a thorough and robust process involving 2 doctors and a High Court judge. No other jurisdiction in the world has those layers of safeguarding.
So a High Court judge would have to sign off on an assisted death for it to happen. That's an important safeguard that for some MPs was the reason they wanted to back the legislation. But then came the rumours that the requirement for a High Court judge might be removed. And when I spoke to Kim Leadbeater last night, the MP introducing the legislation, I tried to find out what was going on.
I'm not proposing that we take out the role for the judge at all. There will be a role for a judge in the things that I'm looking at.
A judge, but not a High Court judge?
Well, no, it would be a High Court
Right.
judge. Yeah, it would be a High Court judge. So we'd keep that in. So we'd end up with what you might call a judge plus model,
Right.
where we could add extra additional expertise into that process.
So look, hands up. To me, that didn't sound like they were going to get rid of the High Court judge. And maybe that's on me and I wrongly interpreted Kim, but it certainly didn't really seem clear. But then after that interview, I saw the front page of The Guardian with the headline, "Court sign-off in assisted dying to be scrapped." The paper reported a panel of experts would replace the judge's personal sign-off. Now, Kim Leadbeater insists that a High Court judge would still have oversight, there would be a review process, but this change has sparked anger, I guess, among people who already have concerns over the bill and even some doubts among those who voted for it the last time.
Does she remember in the second reading debate how many members, including I think herself, made reference to the judicial stage of the process, specifically the High Court judge? There were over 60 colleagues who have stated on the record that they voted for the bill at second reading because of that safeguard. Does she acknowledge that point?
So frankly, it does feel a little bit of a mess. MPs feel the change has been jumped on them. I can't be the only one who's found it quite hard over the last 24 hours to work out exactly what is being proposed here. And look, this is complicated legislation. Usually, if the government's introducing something, they have the support of the civil service, of the number 10 press office, of cabinet. But instead, because, rightly assisted dying is a matter of conscience, it's been introduced through a private member's bill. So in other words, it's being introduced by one backbench MP, Kim Leadbeater. It is an awful lot on one person, however hard-working, however well-meaning they may be. And now there is a real question about whether this bill will eventually become law. We can talk now to our political correspondent, Liz Bates. I said there at the end there's a question about whether it will become law because there are reports about some MPs starting to waver. What's your sense?
Oh, there's no question about that, Sophie. And I thought the way that you just presented all of that there was really illuminating because I think that's how a lot of MPs feel. This is a very difficult, very divisive issue. And I think that the way that, look, Kim Leadbeater is very passionate about this, but I think over the last 24 hours, some of her colleagues feel that in really trying to get into the detail of this legislation and explain these changes, she has made people feel more confused. And some of those MPs who very tentatively voted at second reading for this bill with this particular reassurance about a High Court judge now feel that there are question marks over whether they can trust the process and whether they can vote for it at third reading. Trying to get clarity on this, I did speak to Kim Leadbeater as well today, and let's hear what she said.
So the panel would now be a senior legal expert, either a retired judge or a KC, but they would be accompanied by people like a psychiatrist and a social worker, because the two big issues that have come up throughout this whole process as assessing capacity and checking for coercion. Now, psychiatrists and social workers do those things as part of their daily work all the time. So we would have an assisted dying commission, which would be headed by a High Court judge or a retired High Court judge. So you've got the judicial oversight, but you would have these expert panels who would make the decisions once the doctor had made that referral.
And Liz, look, you, the second reading and also today, you've been looking at the numbers, what MPs might be doing. What is your sense?
So the numbers around this are really interesting because the last time round, it didn't seem like the vote was that close because the majority was 55. But when you kind of step back and you realise that a huge proportion of those MPs in the middle, that vote is very soft. There were lots of MPs who just voted to get it to this stage so they could really see the detail. Now, the rumblings in Westminster that up to 60 MPs are considering their position on this, it would only take 28 to go from for to against to end this bill. This bill would fail in that situation. So you can see how tight the numbers will be. I spoke to an MP on the Bill Committee who said, look, every single person who voted against this bill, their position is pretty concrete. We're really just trying to hang on to those MPs in the middle, and today has not helped them in doing that.
That's really interesting. And the sort of softness of some of that vote, it's definitely reflected in people that I've spoken to as well who, this is difficult and people are genuinely trying to weigh out the best way forward on it. Liz,
they really are.
Thank you very much indeed, Liz Space. Well, one person who has made up their mind is the Labour MP Antonia Band. She helped organise the opposition to the bill in Parliament. I spoke to her earlier. Thank you very much for being on the programme. You voted against assisted dying. You've got concerns about how the process has been conducted since then as well. And you, along with some other MPs, have published a statement today. Just talk me through what it says.
So what it says is that we have concerns about the process the bill has been followed, particularly this new development today, where the sponsor of the bill has said that she is going to remove the need for a High Court judge to sign off the request for an assisted death. Now, lots of MPs voted at second reading in favour of the bill on the understanding that that gold standard of sign-off for that decision, that ultimate decision, would be in the bill. But today we're hearing it's coming out to be replaced by some sort of tribunal. We don't know what, because we haven't seen the actual amendment yet. This is a really big deal, a really big change to the principle of the bill. And I know that it's going to make a lot of MPs think twice about what they do at the upcoming votes.
I mean, what would you say to people who perhaps listen to you think, look, you're against assisted dying, which is fair enough, but whatever happens in this process, you're not going to support it, so why should your voice, I guess, matter so much now?
So I'm a new MP. I've only been an MP for just over 6 months. And I came into Parliament, this wasn't what I expected to be doing. I expected to be supporting the Labour manifesto, fixing the NHS, all the things that we were elected to do. I've had to make up my mind really quickly what I think about this, in common with loads of my colleagues who are new MPs. Now, lots of us have come to the conclusion that whatever your views on the principle of assisted dying, and reasonable people may reasonably differ, this bill is not fit for purpose. It will not make good law.
You say there about, as a new MP, it's a huge decision to be faced with, which I think most people would agree with. Do you feel some, I guess, do you think Keir Starmer got it wrong in all, if you like, supporting a bill like this so early on in MPs' tenures?
Well, the interesting thing about this bill, as I know you know, Sophie, is that we are all just Labour MPs, individual MPs where it comes to this bill.
We know what the leadership thinks, though, right? He's made it pretty clear.
The Prime Minister has made it clear what he thinks as the MP for Holborn and St Pancras, and his voice is no greater than my voice or any other Labour MP's voice on this. This isn't a government bill. This is a backbench bill. It is a free vote for Labour MPs and a matter of conscience.
You talk about the kind of process and the concerns about the process, and you say how it's a private member's bill, and of course the person pushing it through is Kim Leadbeater. Have you spoken to her personally about your concerns on this?
So, of course, I've spoken to Kim. I spoke to Kim at the outset when she came so high in the private members' ballot at the beginning of her campaign for this bill.
Have you spoken to her recently, though, since the committee stage?
I haven't spoken to her recently.
Because I guess she might think that, she's trying to steer this through, and she's got all these Labour MPs kind of writing public statements, writing letters. Why aren't they talking to her about it?
So we have written a statement today, and we wrote a letter last week. The letter that we wrote was in response to a letter from the sponsor of the bill to every Labour MP that went to everybody's email account directly to all of us. We thought that Labour MPs deserve to hear from both sides. This isn't an issue where people just divide along party lines. It's an issue where we each have to make up our own minds as to what we think the right answer to the question in front of us is on this specific bill. One of the things that is wonderful about this process, and there isn't much that's wonderful about this process, is how people within our party who agree on so much can civilly and respectfully disagree with one another. Now, Kim won a really important by-election for us. She supports our culture, media and sport ministerial team, and she's important to us. I am glad that she's putting her voice forward. I don't agree with her, and that's okay in a grown-up political party.
What's your sense on whether or not this bill will get through? Because there have been, it passed decisively the first time MPs were asked to vote on it, but there have been some murmurings among people who backed it last time, saying they are reconsidering their support. Have you looked at the numbers at all?
So all day since this news broke overnight that the High Court judge was being removed from the process, I've been talking to Labour MPs in the tea room, over coffees, to see where they are. And there are lots of people who are just taking a pause. I think they thought they knew what they were likely to do. They didn't expect a change of this magnitude. And lots of people, they're thinking, oh, do I need to reconsider what I think? Labour MPs are talking to one another. We're waiting to see the actual detail of what this is.
Right, let's bring in our duo for the evening, shall we? The Liberal Democrat MP, Christine Jardine, and Guto Harry, the former Director of Communications at Downing Street. Great to have you both on the programme. Right, let's talk assisted dying. You're both in favour of the principle. Christine, I'm interested in your view as someone who's, in Westminster, because you disagree with a bit of the assessments of some of our, guests on the programme, that there has been this shift away from assisted dying.
I think basically what they're doing is what the committee is supposed to do. They listened to evidence from various groups, all sides of the argument, and they looked at what they had and took on board the concerns. And we heard Kim talking about how the concerns were about was it the right thing to do, but were people making their own decisions or were they being coerced? And they needed, a High Court judge to overlook. They needed psychological input, social workers, and that's what they've done. So for me, that's what you expect from a bill committee, to look at the bill and strengthen it. And I thought when I heard about the changes, I thought, I'm not going to make a snap judgment. I'll think about it. And to me, it actually makes it stronger, because rather than one High Court judge making a legal assessment, you've got the High Court judge, but you've got a psychiatrist who has to be involved, and you've got a social worker with experience of looking at how people are being treated, how they're behaving, whether they're showing signs of being coerced. And I think that actually strengthens it. So this has been very contentious. There's lots of people, claim and counter-claim, but actually the Bill Committee is doing what they should be doing. And now we all have to do what we're supposed to do and look at it and say, do we like the way this is developing? As it goes through, it's still got report stage, it's got to go to the House of Lords, probably come back. So the second reading wasn't the end of the bill. It didn't define what the bill was going to be. It set out the parameters that they were going to work within.
What do you think? Because there has been this accusation, admittedly, as you point out, by people on one side of the debate who are anti-assisted dying, that it's been chaotic. Is that right, do you think?
No, I mean, it's meant to be a live piece of legislation that gets shaped and kicked into shape as it goes through Parliament, and kicked into shape by everyone. And it's completely unfair to play the woman, not the ball. And
you think that's what's happening?
Yes, they're targeting somebody who heroically has put on the table something that governments have ducked or rightly concluded is not for a government to do. And Kim is there to drive the sort of big, broad principle. And the big, broad principle, which is why I keep coming back to it, is if somebody is fully conscious in mind and is not being coerced, knows what they're doing, and they're terminally ill, and they don't want to die a horrific death, should we, be able to create the conditions where they can be assisted in that? And whether that is, a psychiatrist and a junior judge or a High Court judge or a retired judge, that's the kind of detail that rightly she can say, you guys, you women, please help me sort that out. It's exactly what should happen. And I hope that in arguing over the detail, people don't hide behind that detail to deny us what has to be a progressive state for Britain, that we embrace the principle that there is dignity in dying, with safeguards, important safeguards, but we cannot throw the baby out with the bathwater on that one.
What's your sense on whether there are MPs who are thinking about changing their vote or not?
Well, it's interesting. I heard one MP last night who had voted yes, but with caveats, and she wanted to be reassured. And after she heard the changes that Kim was suggesting, was quite happy. She was still in the same place. So it's a very personal thing. So you could speak to 10 people and get 10 people who haven't changed their minds, and speak to another 10 people and get 10 people who potentially have, and possibly for lots of different reasons. It's, as Gitter says, it's not a defined process. It develops, and the bill has to develop from now until it becomes an act. And it's only when it becomes an act that we have the final version. There will be other changes, I would imagine, between now. The Bill Committee's got another couple of weeks to go. There'll be other changes, and then those report stages, I say, and it'll go to the Lords. It'll be probably be amended there. So I think we just have to wait and see what we're presented with in the end.
I'll tell you what my concern is. In politics in general at the moment, public debate, it's not for the faint-hearted. It's vicious, you get shot down.
Yeah.
And so the temptation to default to not doing something is always very tempting. But not doing something is a choice. And I hope that MPs who may just think, you know, I'll just back off and leave this, they are making an active choice to allow people to keep dying in agony, unaided, where they could be put out of their misery, defaulting to an active choice by not taking a choice. And so there is no easy option here. The choice is on the table. They have got to come to conclusion. Don't hide behind the detail. Don't hide. Take a decision, show that you are worthy to be a representative of people in Parliament, and this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to move something forward in a way that will just take out some of the misery that we don't need in this country.
Thanks both very much indeed. And clearly, you know, feelings running very, very high on both sides of the debate as we get to the kind of thorny stage, I guess, of the legislation. Thanks both. Well, earlier I spoke to the Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, about the assisted dying bill, but also about the government's plans to increase the numbers of apprenticeships. Thank you very much for being with us today. I'm obviously keen to talk more about your plan for apprenticeships, but you'll have seen the latest twist on the assisted dying legislation. I know you voted against it, obviously, at second reading, but what do you make of the plans to allow a panel of experts to sign off on assisted dying rather than a High Court judge?
You'll understand that as a government we take a neutral position on this matter. It's for individual members of Parliament to decide how they want to vote and the approach that they take. The process now is underway of that line-by-line scrutiny in committee. When it emerges out the other side, in whatever shape or form, then of course members across the House will take a decision as to how they vote on that matter. And whatever individual views you might hold as members of Parliament, as part of the government, it's my responsibility to maintain that position of neutrality.
I totally accept that, but I'm asking the question to not the Education Secretary, but to Bridget Phillipson, if that makes sense. And, you know, even people who voted against the legislation, or perhaps especially those people, I guess, would have hoped the safeguards would have been improving as the committee looked at this legislation. Do you think that's happening?
MPs from across the House will have the opportunity to air those views, both in committee and as the bill progresses through Parliament. And whilst you note that I am an individual member of Parliament, I am also still a member of the government. When I come on,
stop the others.
Well, when
I'm talking about it all the time.
Well, when I come on your show, I do come on as a member of the government as well as a member of Parliament. So I hold my own views on this topic. People have a wide range of views across Parliament. They will be able to vote in the way that they see fit. This is a matter for individual conscience and for individual members of Parliament. And there will be opportunities to further air the issues that you raise, and we will all of us have the chance at later stages of the progress of the bill to vote as we see fit.
Right, you've got an announcement on apprenticeships. Tell me about it. What is it?
So this week is National Apprenticeships Week, and it's a great opportunity to showcase the fantastic work of our apprentices. But as part of our plan for change, we know that there's a lot more we need to do to get the skills our country needs and to give people the chance to get on. That's why I'm setting out changes that we're making to apprenticeships that will create 10,000 extra apprenticeships every year, So cutting some of that red tape, allowing employers to have more flexibility where it comes to English and maths requirements on apprentices for the over 19s. That's something that business has been calling for a long time. We think it's a common sense approach, and it will allow us to really kickstart economic growth, house building. And I visited just yesterday some apprentice bricklayers at a site, and it was just so inspiring to hear about what they are experiencing. And I want more people in our country to have those fantastic opportunities to get a trade.
I'm just going to pitch you the concerns of Robert Halfon, the former Conservative MP, not in the same party to you, but I think someone who many people feel has a respectable background when it comes to apprenticeships and skills. So he's worried that the government is focusing on the quantity and not the quality of apprenticeships by reducing the length of time you have to study for, by taking away the English and maths requirement. What would you say to that argument?
I think it is really important that we maintain apprenticeships as the gold standard, but this does maintain really high standards. What it means is that those who are over the age of 19 won't be required to go through English and Maths GCSE, but they will need to meet occupational standards in English and Maths. So they will still come out with a really good level in those kind of core areas. So, for example, the bricklayers I was talking about, what really is important for them is the ability to use ratios, to estimate, to use arithmetic around quantity. Do they need a full GCSE in Maths in order to do that? I think lots of your viewers would recognise that it's not essential. This is something that has been widely backed by business. What I'd also say is, whilst I do respect the views of Robert Halfon, I would just observe that quality is important, quantity does matter as well, and we desperately need more apprenticeship starts. Under the last Conservative government, particularly where it came to young people, we had a big drop in the number of apprenticeship starts. We've got to turn that around, get more homes built, for example, and provide those really fantastic apprenticeship opportunities for our young people.
I guess part of his argument is that previously, or still sometimes, people have looked down a bit on apprenticeships, and he's worried that that might, I guess, exacerbate that problem.
But this red tape that we've got is holding back young people from taking up these fantastic opportunities. So young people over the age of 19 and adults beyond that will be able to get the chance to take on an apprenticeship. And it's so important that we grow that number. This has been widely welcomed by businesses, by business organisations, and it's also alongside wider reforms that we're bringing on bringing down the minimum length in terms of an apprenticeship. So some of those shorter apprenticeships where 12 months is great for lots of trades, but it's not always essential. So bringing forward more opportunities to give more people the chance to train. And alongside that, one of the first pieces of legislation that we introduced as a government was Skills England. So let's bring together that really fragmented landscape of skills. Let's take skills a lot more seriously as a country. And today we announced the leadership that will take Skills England forward to really drive this work around skills, around growth and around economic opportunity across our country.
There was one other thing I did want to speak to you about while we've got you. I just noticed a survey out today of 700 nursery providers saying 4 in 10 nurseries say they'll have to offer fewer childcare places as a result of the government's increases to national insurance employer contributions. Now, when we last spoke about this, which was back in November, I asked if you were concerned about the impact of that measure in the budget on childcare settings and the early years, and you said we're going to look at the impact on the sector. We're doing that work right now. So have you got anything more you can tell us on whether you are looking to help childcare providers, nurseries, on how they deal with that?
So whilst private nurseries fall outside of the scope of any extra support the government might put in place around national insurance, unlike, for example, schools, I do recognise the need to grow places across our country, recognising the challenges that exist, particularly in some communities where the demand is not there for extra hours from parents, and we need to create those places.
Some of them are going bust, or dropping places. It's more than a challenge, right?
And that's why we have massively increased the early years pupil premium, so that will really help to create more places through funding to providers in areas where there is the greatest challenge in providing places. We're also putting more money into the sector alongside the money that we'd already announced through the childcare expansion. I'll be setting out very shortly what that will mean for providers in terms of funding rates, but we do recognise the need to boost the sector and particularly creating places in areas where they aren't currently, alongside our plans for more primary-based nurseries, so better aligning childcare, early years and schools. So again, there are lots of parts of the country where we effectively have childcare deserts. So parents want the places and they don't exist. So the extra funding we're putting into the system is designed to really drive forward place creation in those areas.
But nothing on national insurance. That's there to stay. They've got to suck that up.
Well, in addition to the £8 billion that we're putting into the sector through the early years expansion, alongside that, I announced additional investment around, for example, early years pupil premium and the expansion grant. So there is extra money going in. But I think everyone recognises that there have been some really tough choices to make as a government. That has had to involve asking employers to pay more around national insurance. That's because we've got to fix our NHS, we've got to invest more in our schools, and we've got to turn the country around.
OK, thanks very much. Well, the debate around assisted dying is sure to feature in tomorrow's newspapers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the journalist and broadcaster Jenny Kleeman and the PR consultant Alex Dean. Now, when it was revealed that £100 million was being spent on a tunnel to protect bats from high-speed trains, there was outrage, including from the Prime Minister. In opposition, Keir Starmer was pretty blasé about how quickly he could use planning to deliver growth. Here he is speaking to me just under a year ago.
But there's a lot of things we can do very quickly. The changing the planning regulations and rules can be done very, very quickly.
But after promising to get Britain building and tear down the obstacles to infrastructure, it appears the Prime Minister may have run out of answers on the Bat Tunnel. Our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, reports.
Lurking in the woodlands of Buckinghamshire, there is a monster. It horrifies politicians and environmental campaigners alike, endlessly talked about, never seen, until now. This is the HS2 Bat Tunnel, a £100 million, 1 kilometre shed to protect the estimated 300 bats in woodland nearby. HS2 say current environmental law meant this was the only option. For the Prime Minister, it's the symbol of a broken system.
The absurd spectacle of a £100 million bat tunnel holding up the country's single biggest infrastructure project.
Labour MPs know the Prime Minister has staked the party's reputation on changing that system and delivering growth.
The fact that we've spent £100 million on this tunnel is a sign of the fact that the Conservatives didn't do the things they needed to do to get stuff built.
What should happen? How are you going to stop that?
The government's already talked about a nature restoration fund, which will help us find a way to protect our wildlife and environment and get things built at the same time. That sort of thing is the right way forward so we can avoid this monumental failure.
That fund is the government's answer to bat tunnels and the like, but big questions over whether it's enough.
The Prime Minister and Chancellor are agreed that this can never happen again. Ministers are ratcheting up the rhetoric about an absurd waste of taxpayers' money. But HS2 say that the law made it a necessity. And government sources have told me that, for all the tough talk, they don't yet have a solution to prevent bat tunnels and similar structures being built in the future.
That's because laws inherited from the EU are what made this project necessary. Changing them risks derailing the UK's trade deal with Europe and sets up a fight with environmental groups. The RSPB has 1.2 million members, more than every political party combined. They're adamant they aren't anti-development.
This is a great example of development and nature side by side.
But they are clear they have red lines.
That builders versus blockers thing, I think, no longer applies. And certainly what got us really concerned was the simplicity of that rhetoric of blaming bats, blaming newts for not being able to get building.
Does that, in your view, maybe lead them towards what you would regard as the dangerous option of repealing some of that nature and habitat regulation?
We can't go backwards in terms of the protections we already have in place for nature, because nature is on its knees and we need to do something about that.
Ministers are hoping for a clever compromise to avoid the next bat tunnel. Experts are sceptical it'll work. Can the Prime Minister's political sonar navigate this one safely? Sam Coates, Sky News, Buckinghamshire.
Well, Sam joins us now. And Sam, much as I love the idea of the kind of superhero comic sounding bat tunnel, there's a really serious point here about Keir Starmer and his growth agenda. He needs to get this right.
That's absolutely right, Sophie. As he said to you, growth and changing the planning system to get growth was his #1 priority. He said so over a year ago, before the election, and he ramped up the rhetoric earlier this year where he said that he was taking on the blockers that might impede new housing developments, new infrastructure developments. So we are starting a series on Sky News, Sophie, to hold him to his word, see whether he can deliver that growth. The battle for growth will look in detail about whether the rhetoric can match up to the reality, which is why that we started with this structure known as the Bat Tunnel. It's in fact a shed, this 1 kilometre shed in Buckinghamshire. It's become the emblem of everything that is wrong with the planning system. Years in the making, £100 million cost, delaying projects, the high-speed rail project. Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves have said it won't happen again. But, Sophie, as we said in that film, there are doubts by planning lawyers, doubts by experts, doubts by environmentalists, that simply saying that by the Prime Minister will be delivered. It's too hard, some of them believe. The laws that forced HS2 to build the Bat Tunnel are bound up in our trade deal with the EU. They're not sure a third-way compromise can happen. Government says wait and see. Well, that's exactly what we're doing. And can they deliver? This kind of scrutiny, I think, is going to increase on Keir Starmer because of the nature of his rhetoric and the boldness of his promises and the necessity of getting growth in order to generate tax dollars, tax money for public services. So we will see if he actually can deliver what he promised the British people.
And Sam, the question I've got to ask is, are there any bats in the Bat Tunnel? Or is this basically like when you buy your cat a cat bed and they never sleep in it?
Well, a little fact for you, Sophie. We were actually denied permission to go into the Bat Tunnel itself by HS2, which is still building the thing. So we had to scramble through forests and get incredibly muddy in order to find somewhere to put up the drone in order to show you the pictures that we got you. But that drone was the only flying thing that we saw on that tour. There's a little irony about this. One of the reasons that they needed a Bat Tunnel was because they wanted to protect this incredibly rare species of bat known as the Bechstein bat, which back when they were doing all the surveys in 2013 was really very rare, and there were just a few hundred. Now there are tens of thousands, Sophie. So there are some asking the question, was it necessary at all? Some of these regulations require incredibly prescriptive answers, but it doesn't always feel like there's a great deal of common sense involved in how they're implemented.
Sam, thank you very much indeed. Right, let's talk to Christina Gutto at this point, shall we? I love the idea of the Bat Tunnel. You're shaking your head.
Well, do you know, in a weird way, that is bat something that I won't say on a polite programme. It symbolises a whole load of things. I don't believe that it needs to cost 100 million. And I bet you if you had a breakdown of the budget, that very little went on the construction. It all went in consultancy and consultation and in hiring experts and all of this kind of stuff. This is what's wrong. I'll give you a fun fact that I discovered when I was in number 10. You can put up a windmill, for instance, in a day. On average, how long does it take to get through all the different planning permissions to get it? 10 years. So the government is right to address that. I wish them well. I think their instincts are even more interventionist than a libertarian prime minister who does not think that we should be getting in the way. Everything about this government, their instincts are the opposite. So what they will genuinely do to go against Europe, to go against health and safety, to go against local Labour councils, I don't have much hope for it. But I also think there's a lot of cynical stuff here where people drive up the cost of something that could have been built for a lot less, because preservation is important.
This is the thing, isn't it? Because, look, there is a balance here. Look, we've been joking about the Bat Tunnel, but, you know, there is a serious point here about how environmental legislation, protecting our wildlife, our countryside, all this stuff matters. Where do you fall on this?
I think you're right. You do have to find a balance. But I was watching the film trying to figure out how on earth what looks like a shed you'd put up to protect your tomatoes cost £100 million. It's ludicrous. And yes, we do need to find the balance. Yes, bats are a protected species. We need to respect that. But if we're going to have growth, we need to have a system that's sensible and looks at how you do things in an affordable way and in the right way. And we look for the right trade deals. And we shouldn't get hung up on these things because, frankly, the whole thing is daft when it comes to, £100 million bat tunnel. By all means, protect the bats. It's very important. But please, do it in a sensible way.
Do you know what? Mother Nature is pretty sophisticated.
Yeah.
I think bats would find a way of dealing with HS2 suddenly being on the perimeter of their forest. And again here, you need people who are not just Jobsworth saying, you can't do that unless you do X, and that's going to cost 100 million, which is the default that we have in our system. But people say, how do we safeguard the bats? Because it is important. And how do we actually build a little piece of high-speed railway that is the equivalent of what China builds every single day at the moment in high-speed rail?
I want to see the evidence that there's any bats in there. I'm not. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe
to
I'm
protect
wrong.
them from flying into the trains, apparently. So they.
Oh, is it?
They will see
that
the
makes
shed.
more sense.
So they see the sheds and they won't fly into the shed because it's static. Whereas the danger is they will fly in front of a train. But again, I think
You're not
bats
the
are
expert
pretty
here,
quick.
Claire.
I think they can see a train coming.
You know a frightening amount about bats.
And you know what? They sleep upside down.
What do you take about the word NIMBY being thrown around?
I think it's a bit unfair because I think there's the right developments in the right place are what we all want to see. We all want to see more houses, but they have to be the right size of house, the right type of development. It needs to be in the right place and it needs to be where communities want them. And that's what we have to be looking at. HS2, we needed a high-speed rail link. Was it in the right place? I'm not sure, but I do know that it hasn't gone down well with just about anybody now. But we do need to improve our connectivity and we do need to encourage people to use means of transport that are not going to damage the environment in the way that flying does.
Thanks both very much indeed. Still to come on the Politics Hub. 50 years to the day since Margaret Thatcher became Conservative leader, John Craig is going to join our panel to look back at what she was like before she became the Iron Lady.
UK Tonight at 8, as the UK's biggest police force is told it can't get rid of officers by removing their vetting clearance, we'll ask if the system is fit for purpose. Tonight, I'm joined by campaigner Patsy Stevenson and former Inspector of the Constabulary, Zoe Billingham. Plus, the man who is trying to buy a rubbish tip after his ex-girlfriend threw away a hard drive he says has hundreds of millions of pounds of Bitcoin on it. And the feral pigs on the run in the Scottish Highlands. All that and much more on the UK Tonight from 8.
Day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America? People want their country to work.
They want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
I'm James Matthews and I'm Sky's US correspondent, based here in Washington, D.C. I've covered some of the biggest stories in the world.
I'm Deborah Haynes, Sky's security and defence editor. I've covered Russia's full-scale war since it began, witnessing the terror and the trauma.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin. Sky News, get the full story first.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
Getting the chance to tell people's stories, it's a privilege. I'm Adam Parsons, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels.
I'm Dan Whitehead, Sky News' West of England and Wales correspondent. Sky News, get the full story first, free, wherever you get your news.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
I'm Nicole Johnston, Sky's Asia correspondent, based here in Beijing.
Once almost lost, these denizens of the deep are back.
The problem for these whales is global warming. Water temperatures are rising. Sky News, the full story first.
may seem like a gimmicky toy, but it is part of the global race between the United States and China for new technology.
Hello, welcome back. Now, 50 years ago to the day, Margaret Thatcher defeated Ted Heath, party leader and former Prime Minister, to become the leader of the Conservatives. And the woman who's following in her footsteps, Kevin Badenoch, has been reflecting on her legacy, calling her a tough act to follow. And the future Iron Lady's reputation, of course, is for having an uncompromising, my way or the highway attitude to her opponents. But in the wake of her victory, she struck a conciliatory tone.
It is important to me that this prize has been won in open electoral contest with 4 other potential leaders. I know that they'll be disappointed, but I hope we shall soon be back working together as colleagues for the things in which we believe.
You might have noticed a familiar face joining our panel this evening. John Craig, our chief political correspondent, who you've met my Margaret Thatcher, right?
Of course, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I was.
Obviously.
I became a political correspondent in 1982, when she'd already been Prime Minister 3 years. 82 was the year of the Falklands War, of course, one of the great episodes of her premiership. Actually, the 11th of February is the anniversary of the second ballot, when she beat Willie Whitelaw. Now, a week before, she beat Ted Heath in the first round. Now, I can reveal...
Oh, here we
go. My
go.
first ever visit to Parliament was February the 4th, 1975, the day of the first ballot. It was a sixth form trip, British government and politics students, A-level, Tadcaster Grammar School. And I remember, after Harold Wilson had done his vaudeville routine at PMQs, Labour MPs coming into the chamber laughing, because, of course, she was the outsider. She was not expected to beat Heath. And, in fact, Charles Moore, her biographer, says that when she told Dennis she was going to stand against Heath, he said, "Heath will murder you." And it was a shock when she won. So Labour MPs were laughing. They weren't laughing after she won 3 general elections, though. But, and you saw there, it was the sort of unpolished, unvarnished Margaret Thatcher before the image makers got to work on her. I mean, what she has in common, of course, with Sir Keir Starmer is she had a voice coach too. It was,
but not breaching COVID rules on Christmas.
Well, it wasn't COVID in those days. But she had a...
Apparently all rules were followed, I should say, according to Keir Starmer's team.
She had a PR man called Gordon Rees who hired this voice coach, who actually coached Laurence Olivier. And, of course, she was nothing like as grand there as she later became. Now, our Sky News colleague, Mark Williams, has dug out a transcript of a news conference she gave on the day, just after she became leader. And her answers are so refreshingly simple, obviously not got at by the PR people, with all due respect to a former PR person. For question here... What would you like to say to people who are still sceptical about the idea of a lady leader? Give me a chance, she said. What about the male-dominated parliamentary party? Are you surprised they've elected you? They seem to like ladies, she said. And then she said at one point, what was the issue that put you at the top? It was merit. Did you expand on that? No, it doesn't need expansion. And then there was one... do you regard yourself as a Mrs. Gandhi? No, I regard myself as Margaret Thatcher. And finally, what quality would you most like the Tory party displaying under your leadership? The winning quality.
Amazing.
So that was her right at the very beginning.
Perfect answers.
So quick, have to say, that's so quick. Christine, what's your sort of views on Margaret Thatcher?
Well, I probably wouldn't have agreed now with her policies, but I have to say I do think that we underestimate the impact that she had in British politics. She's hugely important. I wouldn't be sitting here now if Margaret Thatcher hadn't won that election. I don't know how long... If she hadn't won that election and become Conservative leader and then become Prime Minister, how long would it have been before we had a woman Prime Minister? If you go to the Cabinet Office, there's a meeting room and there's a corridor with pictures of the Cabinet, at various different times in our history. And until you get to the 80s, there's only Margaret Thatcher and Barbara Castle, really, in the Cabinet. And then it changes dramatically. And it takes a long time to get to where we are now. But regardless of her policies, there were 2 things she did. One, she got women into politics and believing. As a wee girl watching television, I saw a female Prime Minister and I thought, actually, you can do anything you want. That was hugely important. And she also changed the economic parameters. You know, you look at people, you know, political figures who changed the way the economy ran. You've got FDR in the 1930s and you've got Margaret Thatcher in the 1980s. And like it or lump it, you can't take that away from her.
It's very interesting. Good say.
You know, growing up in South Wales in the 80s, there are cultural reasons why I was never that comfortable with Margaret Thatcher. But I have to say, not only on unleashing a British economy that was being suffocated, you know, she has been more than vindicated historically. But there's another thing that goes back to our discussion on HS2. Can you imagine the reaction of civil servants and the great and the good and the press when somebody says, I'd like to build a tunnel under the channel between England and France? And I can't imagine anyone else who would have had the sort of the determination, the audacity, the relentlessness to face them all down, because the engineers will tell you they can do anything. But she made that happen. And I think that's one of the things that's often overlooked. And that's where I would like to see a bit of the Thatcher spirit, not in the sort of divisiveness and the crushing of certain communities, but in that there's a reason people go into government is to get stuff done and walk the walk, don't just talk the talk.
But just on the economy, of course, she faced down her critics. In the early years of Margaret Thatcher, of course, she was under pressure. Unemployment was climbing. And there's the famous speech, Tory conference 1980. I won't do the voice. You turn if you want to. Go on, you persuaded me to. You persuaded me I wasn't going to.
He looked at me and then he's like, oh, I'm going to do the voice.
You turn if you want to. The lady's not for turning. One of her great quotes. My other favourite, of course, I can say it at this time of the evening, I hope. Every Prime Minister needs a Willie. I mean, the guy that she defeated, of course, in the second round, Willie Whitelaw, became her loyal deputy and served her loyally for years and years and years. She had some good people around her as well. I mean, she had a great press officer, Bernard Ingham, who we all remember. She had those spin doctors like Gordon Rees, but she had good people in her cabinet as well, like Willie Whitelaw. And of course, there was, you know, it was a tumultuous time. The miners' strike, South Wales, big place. Wapping. Falklands War. She faced down her critics. That's why they called her the Iron Lady.
Well, everyone's got a view on her, certainly. Thanks all very much. Great to have you on the programme this evening. That's all from us tonight. It has been a rollercoaster of a show. Again, of course, might have to ban this one next time. But anyway, we will see you tomorrow at 7 p.m. Up next, it's a UK Tonight with Sarah J. Mee. I'll see you tomorrow.